thank you. Good evening for everyone that's in attendance online. This is meeting of the Wareham Planning Board for July 18, 2022. We'll open the meeting with taking a roll call. Sherry Crook.
Here.
Mike Baptiste.
Here.
Jane Gleason.
Here.
Sam Corbett.
Here.
Carl Schultz.
Here.
And myself, Michael King. I'm here. At least I think I'm here. So we have a full board. There is no preliminary business that I'm aware of for tonight. There are no public hearings scheduled for tonight. There are no continued public hearings scheduled for tonight. Before we get to other business, specifically Article 6 and Article 15 for discussion, I would entertain a motion that if everybody's had a chance to review the meeting minutes of June 13, 2022, that we go ahead and submit those for approval.
So moved.
As amended, right?
As amended, I'm sorry, yes,
correct.
as amended.
So we're going to talk about draft 3, right?
Yeah.
Draft 3, right.
So as the motion amended, that way I support it with that.
Okay, so we have a motion by Jane Gleason, seconded by Sam Corbett. All in favor of approving the minutes? Sherry?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Jane?
Aye.
Sam?
Aye.
Carl?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Unanimously approved. Okay, moving on to article workshop and discussion. Do we want to begin with Article 6 or Article 15?
We could,
Either one. Yeah, I mean, you're kind of, you've been kind of, you and Jane have been driving this ship.
well,
So
I thought the way we had talked is we're going to split the meeting, so why don't we
Yeah.
start with Article 6?
Article 6, and then just morph into
And then we'll do Article
Yeah.
15 second, and then the next time we'll start with 15.
Article 15. Okay, good. Okay, so Article 6, density and dimensional regulations. I don't have to ask for a motion to begin discussion. This is strictly a workshop, correct?
I think that's correct, yes.
Okay, so let's dive into it.
So Jane, you were kind of leading this, so.
Well, so there were two sets of comments. One from the, I guess they're actually both from the ZBA. One that was dated July 14th. And it had, they sort of accepted a number of sections. They accepted the changes to, or they wanted to change distance to distant, which is a Scrivener's error, I would say, and I think that makes good sense. It shows up on the draft. Then in section 615, they inserted a numeric value of 30 next to the word 30, which is fine. That's consistent with the way it's been going everywhere else. Then in section 620, they wanted to make a change to item 3. And they wanted to say 3 or more residential dwelling units under item 3 instead of, it says other residential use, multiple family, which is defined as 3 or 4 attached units, and apartments, which is defined as 5 or more attached units. I think I don't really agree with that, the way this is written, because in every one of the tables, it lists one family dwelling, two family dwelling, other residential use, non-residential use, and I think if we take out the words other residential use and replace them with 3 or more residential dwelling units, then it lacks that sort of cross continuity.
If I may, Mr. Chair, through you.
And then, well, then there is this second set of notes that suggests that we should take out the word other residential use and change it to per additional dwelling. And again, I don't think I agree with that. And the reason I don't agree with that is that they're taking that per, or that per additional dwelling shows up elsewhere. Can't find it. Where is it? Shows up in the village districts, and I think that was the only one. And that came from, it was a separate section altogether. And I pulled it into the residential districts, or into the village districts, because it made more sense there. But you can't have per additional dwelling the way it's worded here. The way it was used elsewhere, it says first dwelling unit and each additional unit. So you have to have a number for the first dwelling unit. And for instance, they're saying that it should be 30,000 square feet, but for each per additional dwelling. But you have to know what the first dwelling unit is to have an additional
Have an
dwelling unit.
additional one to tack on.
So I think leaving it for now as other residential use makes more sense with language that's elsewhere in the document.
Okay, so my first question, and I wasn't trying to craft anything because I couldn't figure out how to apply this to Bay Point and the eightplexes.
So the way I would apply that, refresh my memory, which zoning district they're in?
Conference recreational, and then I went to the table,
Okay.
and it says there aren't anything that's allowed in conference recreational.
Right.
So the headings don't match the use table in 320, which was my question.
Okay.
So I couldn't figure out how to apply Article 6 to Bay Point. And that's what I was trying to do, is I was testing
Yeah, no, that's good.
how to apply this bylaw to a case.
We've already dealt
And
with it.
I
That
think
we've dealt
that conference recreational is not really set up to handle residential.
But there's clearly residential in that.
Absolutely.
And if you go back to, is it Article 5 or 7, whichever one was the design requirements that talk about,
Yeah,
it's a little weak in that section there too. But, so that's what I was trying to do. I couldn't
Yep.
figure out how to apply this to Bay Point.
well, I
And
think if it's gonna say per additional dwelling, it has to have a number for the first dwelling unit, because I mean, this is saying in MR 30, if you just do a direct change from the words other residential use in the resident in this 621 on this page of notes, and you replace it with per additional dwelling unit, and the 30,000 square feet in MR 30 stays where it is.
that
How much,
wouldn't,
so then are you adding 30,000 square feet per additional unit?
that's what that would
And you have
say.
to, but which number do you use for the first dwelling unit? Do you use the 30,000 square feet or 45? Do you know what I mean? That,
Oh,
yeah.
I have real trouble
Yeah.
applying this
Yep.
section.
so I think I would suggest for right now that we leave the words other residential use because of its reference elsewhere in the document. But I think that you're right, that something has to happen with the conference recreational, with reference to residential use of any sort. And it seems like that may be the case, that we need to look at residential in these other districts unless it's not allowed.
Yeah, okay.
And maybe even if it's not allowed, that somebody could go for a variance and put in residential, and you've got no dimensional requirements.
Requirements, yeah.
So maybe even if it's not allowed as a use, maybe there's an asterisk next to the number that you put in this table that says only by variance, that you put in those dimensional requirements, but I think that that's a big change.
Yes,
But
well,
it's
that's why,
absolutely a good point.
okay, because the next thing that I was going to is we're just kind of okay, so I couldn't apply this to Bay Point.
Yeah.
Not,
yep.
notwithstanding that the table headings don't really
Yeah.
apply. The other thing, and it may or may not relate to this section, but actually back at 611, all principal and accessory buildings. We need to define that. I was thinking in the terms of the solar projects. All the solar projects have accessory buildings or structures. This says that applies to that. All solar projects are in a regional or a residential district. And then I went to try and apply that. We can't apply these dimensional requirements to the accessory buildings on a solar project or a battery project or anything that's this bylaw. And maybe all you need to do is just change where it applies. But we're starting to get uses that are not just houses and stores and
Well, I think that it's that empirical understanding of this bylaw that adds to its robustness. And I guess what I've been doing is I've just been keeping copious notes of everything that I see that's not working.
okay.
Because I think that some of those things are really great points, but I think that they're substantive and need some really serious consideration.
Well, and I agree 100%. So I was thinking some simple definitional changes up
Yep,
front
okay.
that says something like that, that it doesn't apply.
Can you,
It doesn't apply to what? I don't
Like a solar
understand.
project. The accessory buildings, or we just, it's just that lead-in sentence, all principal and accessory buildings,
where are you?
611,
611.
the first sentence of the whole thing.
Yep.
Is there any other bylaw that relates to solar and accessory buildings?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of other, I was just thinking that as an example, so
Yeah.
590 talks about, and you gotta get a special permit and site plan, so that's how I would think.
I think
But
that's how it gets handled.
But I was
yeah.
I was hung up on all principal and accessory buildings. It
Yeah.
isn't all principal and
But you
accessory.
could say, except as otherwise provided.
That's what I'm saying, a simple
Okay.
definitional change might get us out of that
Except-
difficult.
As otherwise,
Provided in these bylaws.
or otherwise stated, or,
I would, I mean,
I think provided
you guys
covers
tell
it.
me
okay,
what sounds
otherwise
less
provided.
legalistic.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mixed two things, because other than that, you're right, it's mostly substantive. The only other thing that I think we should add somewhere is consistent with adding, unless otherwise provided, a statement that says, and in the event of a conflict, the more restrictive
Applies.
applies.
If there is one,
Yeah, I said, in the event that
Yeah.
there is a conflict.
yeah,
And then maybe we want to say, and maybe Mr. Buckland could guide us, what we say, in the absence of, what happens?
yeah.
In the absence of clear and definitive instruction, it falls on the decision-making of the planning board or the,
Well, or something. I was trying to close, so that would then address my concern about Bay Point in the current,
Yeah.
so I was trying to handle that all right up front. So if
So
there's,
I think as a blanket observation, I think it's a great observation that even if there's something that's not allowed, can always be allowed by variance. And so having dimensional numbers for even not allowed instances is probably a good idea.
it's not allowed, it has to be in the use table. Because there's a lot
Right,
of
but if
things in the
we're-
use table that aren't covered here.
Right, but if for instance, just
I'm
as
not
an
trying to make this more difficult. I was actually
yeah.
trying to simplify it by
Yeah.
putting some definitional stuff
Yeah.
to cover sins.
So what were you saying if there's an absence of in the, So we've got a conflict situation is one thing.
Right.
But an absence of
So
regulation.
I was thinking if there's something that's permitted in the use table, but there's no dimensional requirements, what do we do?
Do you think that happens?
I think there's a whole lot, because there's a whole bunch of columns in the use table that aren't called out in
Okay.
this.
Carl? Why-
That's something that the building commissioner has to take on.
What exactly is he taking on?
I'm sorry, Ken, I didn't understand.
The building commissioner has to make the determination of conformance with the zoning, and if there's not conformance, or he finds something that's missing, he passes it on to the zoning board of appeals to review.
Okay, all I was saying is don't be silent. That's okay. Words like that are okay. And then Charlie was going to say something.
So in
just
the
gonna
absence
ask
of regulation, the zoning board of appeals will,
Well, the zoning, Ken's saying the zoning enforcement officer will make a judgment, and if necessary,
Refer it to the ZBA. I don't know, that sounds counterproductive. I mean, aren't we trying to refine the zoning so that we can act accordingly?
yes, except that Jane was saying we're not, in this go-round, going to undertake all
I'm
this
just worried about taking on substantive matters, really, you know. We don't want to do a major site plan.
Yeah, and then Charlie may have some,
Time.
Major site, you know what I mean?
Charlie may have some observations that helps
Got a
us.
question about accessory uses. Why isn't the issue of accessory uses where it's mentioned in this first two lines satisfied by section 625?
It may be.
Talks about accessory uses with setbacks in the various districts and so forth.
But maybe it is, and I didn't catch it. Oh, accessory buildings. That may actually solve my problem, but I didn't get that from the beginning to go look at 625.
I agree that things have been placed in rather odd locations, making it difficult to know when you're looking down at a particular thing and you're looking for a particular thing, instead of being where logically you would think it is, you gotta jump ahead 3 or 4 pages to find it. So I understand where you're coming from. With respect to the CR district, the conference recreational, the way that bylaw was set up, it's set up so that the planning board determines the density. That's where that whole thing is. It's the only district within the town where the planning board is identified as the body that determines the density of that project.
Okay, thank you, and I remember that, and then maybe I'm confused, but in 624, I thought they listed dimensional requirements for CR, so then that column should be removed from the table.
Say that again?
Well, Charlie's right, the conference recreational district was set up that all density were pulled into that.
Well, I think that it stays in there because it's got non-residential use.
It was.
Yeah, but I'm
conference
just talking about
recreational-
a column in table 624, the CR column.
You're wanting to take out this whole column?
Yeah, it doesn't seem to.
But it does have non-residential use in there, so anything else that goes in there other than housing has to conform to this.
That's what I'm saying, I couldn't figure out how to apply this at all.
Okay.
Yeah, that district suggests it should be mixed use, and then it gives an option for residential use in there, so it's,
Yeah, so,
But then it says there's no dwellings in there, but we know there are.
but I think that what Charlie was saying is that in that instance, and probably that deserves a footnote, that the density of any housing in this district would be set by the planning board, is that correct?
Yes,
it's determined by the application that comes before you as to what the density should be for that particular project.
So the applicant just comes to us with something and we say whether it's appropriate, or?
Right.
So it's not a proactive thing, it's a reactive thing.
That's right.
And we spent quite a bit of time on Bay Point trying to decide
Yeah.
if Phase 4 fit within the density requirements that were originally established. And we ultimately came to a solution. I don't know that it was satisfactory,
Well, it's
but
kind of hard for the planning board to have any real effect on it if somebody, it's,
Well, no, no.
it's reactive, not
Right.
proactive.
Yeah, the developer has no idea what he's dealing with up front.
Exactly.
I
It
think-
makes it hard for the developer to do work, and when they come with something, it's hard for the planning board to say, well, that's not appropriate.
Well, unfortunately, I think that's the way it was intended to function. And if you look at that particular bylaw, it talks about a lot of preliminary things that are supposed to take place before you actually get a filing of detailed plans. So when somebody comes in with a particular project, they've got a conceptual plan of what they want. And at that time, the board would deliberate with the applicant as to, okay, how many units you've got, how many units within the buildings, and you decide whether you think for that location, is it appropriate to have that density? They've given you the authority to do that.
we only have one conference recreational district. Is that
Yeah.
correct? No, that's a question.
That's correct.
It's full, it's full.
And
so-
it's full, and the basic
So it's
requirement
whatever
is you gotta have 100 acres,
Kind of a good point.
so.
But I suppose you could say that if there was ever an inclination to change any part of the zoning map to include conference recreational somewhere else, which is a possibility, like up maybe north of 495-25.
Would notice have required a zoning change? I don't remember. Were we changing the zoning for conference recreational for the notice project?
For what?
For the notice project that
They
got,
were asking us to
No,
change.
they never asked for that.
They
Oh,
didn't ask-
okay.
I thought they asked for changes.
Did they
George.
not get that far? Because I would think that that's what they would want.
okay, so that,
So there's an instance where it
Yeah.
would be good to have something on the books in case.
okay,
They
zoning
listed, they
map
listed the
change.
minimum acreage, and then they listed a number of different potential uses.
but
in
they
that
didn't,
proposal.
didn't have a definitive plan for the uses at that point.
No,
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 no, it's just
it was
strictly
left
concept.
wide open, and so they could pick basically anything that was in that category.
That would have been another special overlay district in essence then, right?
I don't recall whether it was
No, but
overlay or whether it
in
was
in
actually a
effect-
change.
In effect, it was gonna change the zoning. for that.
Absolutely, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so so I was just trying to say, I didn't know whether that column needed to remain there. So I'm sorry, I've asked all my questions.
All right.
But I was trying to apply it, and it,
Yeah,
I
right.
can't.
No, that was how I dove into this, because I was trying to apply it for commercial districts, and I could not make head nor tails of what I was reading. So that was what prompted me. So that seems like a good exercise to undertake to see that this works, so.
Okay, so then in response, my comment to your recommendation to not change regarding the ZBA, I can't argue one way or the other, because
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can't make it work.
Yeah,
I was at the meeting, happened to be there for another project, so I sat in on what they were discussing, and they'd like very much to sit down and go over this whole concept with you, because they've got their concerns as well as you do.
yeah.
So
Well,
it makes sense to form maybe a
there's a whole
subcommittee or get together.
brain
somewhere.
trust here of notes of things that work and don't work.
Yeah.
That we need to react to.
Are we gonna have time to work that out with them and schedule a meeting that has us all in attendance?
I think the idea was to have a joint workshop for more substantive changes, not anything related to this.
And it was just Article
4.
6, or was it all bylaws?
This was, they have a grievance list going through the bylaw, so they just want, us to be proactive with planning and wanting to know, I'm sorry?
If Jane and Carl have been working to kind of clean this up and straighten out, where have they been? Why all of a sudden now? Where were they in the beginning when we started this?
Well, I don't know, we had good
I-
cross,
We
No,
might
we
not.
don't. That was
Yeah.
my point.
Right,
Yeah.
so yes.
So now Jane's put all this work in, and they want to come in with what you're describing as substantive changes,
No, I think that the idea was to note for the record that while, you know, they do agree with most of the changes here, other than, you know, the changes that are on the sheet, that they would like to, at a later date, you know, whether, they don't think that there's time for fall, but, I mean,
Yeah, I don't
whether
think
in the
that was my
future.
point.
I don't think
Yeah.
any of us do.
So we could pick this back up after
Yeah.
fall
Yeah.
meeting
Yeah.
and start over again.
But the idea is to just start earlier and kind of, you know, obviously the planning department is the middleman, right? So just kind of keeping everybody on the same page in terms of scheduling what your wants are, what their wants are, and then working that out.
Well, and honestly, I feel like we should get some stuff together for fall town meeting. But after that, if we take on a more substantive look at this, we should not aim at spring town meeting or fall town meeting. We should,
Spring of 2023,
we should
2024.
focus on the job and see how long it's gonna take, to a certain extent. I think it deserves to not be cramped by a hard and
Deadline.
fast deadline.
Yeah.
So a question, and perhaps Mr. Buckland can weigh in, but in the past, for substantive issues that need to be brought before the town, a special town meeting could be called, and rather than putting this on the agenda of any, and I'm not talking about the special meeting within a town meeting that we do every
Yeah.
spring, which makes no sense to me.
Yeah,
More like what we did for Little Harbor, where if we get our stuff together, ask for a special town meeting to review the
well, and
bylaws.
it seems to me that this is probably gonna take more of an effort than the time period between a fall town meeting and a spring
Well,
town meeting, or a spring town meeting and
Well, that's
fall
why I was saying there may,
allow.
that we may have another option, and that's what I was maybe looking to Mr. Buckland to say, can we do it that way?
Yeah,
Rather
and
than
I-
shooting for one of the town meetings.
I think ultimately a holistic look, because once I dive into Article 6, and guess what?
You can't, once you look at one article, you
You can't pull them apart like that.
Yeah.
So, anyway,
All right, I've made my comments on Article 6,
Okay.
and when we get to the end, I have a recommendation, but others haven't
Okay.
spoken yet. I've dominated, and it wasn't my intention.
shall I finish with what was in these notes? Does that make sense?
Could I
There's
just-
one other comment in here
Um,
that I can,
And I just want to get back to the zoning board in terms of their questions. I think they had 3 separate questions. The first one was, why did you propose an increase, I think it's an increased side rear setback
Yep.
for the IND district? Can you-
and actually
explain
what
that
that
one?
is that in the current bylaw as it stands, there is a page or there is a table that has, industrial as a column. And if you flip a couple of pages or a page later, so that's table 624, has a column titled IND for industrial. And then if you go to the next page, 626, dimensional standards for industrial district. So because this has not been interleaved into the original table that was in the bylaws, that it was a separate table that is not at all the format of the original one, it makes me think that this 626 was a later addition. So it is
Okay.
more recent numbers.
Got
So
it.
I chose the 626 numbers
Okay,
and interleaved them into this column of IND under other districts. And
perfect.
that, it was 10 in the old column, and it's 20 in
I
626.
think I remember you mentioning that. Okay, perfect.
So that's how that happened.
The
I
second,
didn't
yeah.
pull it out of the air.
The second question is, you are currently working off of the June 12th, 2021 zoning bylaw, correct?
That's what I've got.
I printed this recently. I may not have the recent one. I apologize.
But the changes that you were going off of were off of the latest bylaw?
What she's describing now is in the June 12th, 2021.
Yeah,
Right.
I printed this
Perfect.
as I was working on it. off of the
Mr.
town website, so
Okay.
if that was,
And
Wait, on that point, before we move on, as I understand it, though, the current zoning bylaw is April 25th, 2022. And my understanding is that bylaws go into effect, zoning bylaws go into effect as soon
As they're
as,
voted?
as soon as they're voted, and unless and until the AG rules against. So the current bylaws that we should, zoning bylaws, excuse me, because town bylaws have a different schedule, should be April 25th, 2022. Is that correct?
That's correct, although the Article 6 didn't change in that time frame.
Oh, that's, that, yeah, notwithstanding, nothing changed, but yeah.
so does this mean that, for example, when you guys have new applications that are filed, that were after this April 25th date, you need a new bylaw? So we need to print you and bind you new bylaws?
Yeah, we should be working off of the latest and the
Right.
greatest.
Okay,
Yep.
so I can make that happen.
Yeah, and, yes, so that
So
question,
that's if the Attorney General approves it as well.
Right.
well, yes, but the way I thought you had coached me to proceed is we would proceed as if, and then if there was an adverse ruling from either the AG or us, or both, then we'd have to go back and revisit that ruling.
Correct.
well, and the thing that complicates that further, is that if we have any applications before us, we need to be cognizant of which version of the zoning bylaws
Absolutely.
is applicable.
And very clearly, we try and do that. So Zero Route 25 and Fearing Hill are subject to the 2019 bylaws. I don't know what else is open at the moment. But the rest, everything else came in.
Is it 5 Doty that's before you guys?
That came in before the 25th, so that's the middle range. That was June.
But it seems that
So we need to be clear, you're right, for
perhaps
each
that should
application.
be clear, like, even in the
Agenda or something?
agenda, should,
Okay.
those dates should follow that project name and number
Okay.
all the time, so that we, don't make a mistake. And it takes some digging to find that,
Right.
so if it,
Well, the only reason I raised the question here was they asked if we were using the June 2021 bylaws, and I said, why would they ask that? Because that's not the current set of bylaws.
well, and, yeah, I mean, who's carrying around every set of the bylaws, and they change every 6 months.
Right.
So we've got to have all of them available to us. And now I need to be carrying them. Yeah. Yeah, need to be carrying them all the time, yeah.
We don't have the April ones yet. They're not
Yeah.
available anywhere.
Okay, so
Okay.
another issue to deal with.
We can get those.
So I was just wondering why they asked the question that way.
Yeah,
I don't know. Okay, final question. And you can confirm, because I was looking at my bylaw, but I think my bylaw is actually misprinted, so a few sections repeat and stuff like that, so my bylaw is out of whack, so I need a new one.
okay.
But you can confirm that for the different tables, you have pulled them to be cohesive, right?
Yes.
From the
Yep.
different, like you guys were just discussing.
Yeah, in fact, there were some tables that were added at the end of the bylaw that I've got in front of me, which is actually, this is October 2018, so I'm way out of date here. But anyway, there are tables 627, 628, actually before that even.
625,
625,
26.
626, 627, 628.
That's it.
Okay, so the idea
Yeah.
was to put them in a centralized location, which makes
To
sense
put them
for
all in the
everybody.
same format and have them just be as consistent as we can be.
Okay,
Just being really dogmatic about it.
great. Thank you, I appreciate it.
I have a picky question if we're ready for a picky question.
Yeah.
Looking at 611,
Yep.
number 5,
Yep.
it says with less than the minimum distance between the use and other residential uses. Is this intended only to apply to residential uses? Because it looks like you're looking at 2 residential.
Yeah, I don't think that I changed that.
You
At all.
probably didn't.
I just
but
took it right from here.
Unless it refers to 2 residential uses, it probably needs to be,
Yeah, just take out other,
yes.
Take out residential.
or just take out other.
Right? That way, there's no inference that you're
With
talking
less
about
than the
true.
minimum distance between the use and residential uses.
Yeah. I agree. Take out other.
Either we take out other or we take out residential.
Depends on whether it's the distance between residential and something else, or something and something else.
So we could take
So
out
you-
the word residential
Yeah, well, I think it would
between the
affect
use
the
and other
same thing.
uses.
Yeah.
Mhm. We'll take out residential, it makes Ken happy.
Okay, take out the word residential.
Okay.
Got it.
Picky on that one point, could we put a paragraph break then? Because you're changing what you're talking about between the first sentence and the second sentence,
In which,
611.
so, a new paragraph at the word no.
Yeah, that's a whole
Hold on.
separate thought, right? It's not a continuation of the previous thought.
I'm fine with that.
Just for readability.
Yep.
I still don't understand then that last sentence, but I'll defer to Jane when we get one that talks about density. A project.
No, I didn't do it. No, I agree that that needs to be in there, and that's why I think that maybe it's worth debating whether there's some logic to putting in dimensional, density and dimensional regulations, even where it's not, it's listed in the use table as not allowed, just so that you've got some teeth. If something,
You're right, we don't want things to happen because we didn't cover it.
right. Yeah, and if there's the possibility of somebody getting a variance to do something, then we ought to give them the regulations, density and dimensional regulations for that.
But then they can get a variance from these anyway.
It's a conundrum.
Yes, they
It's a
can.
conundrum.
At least there's a starting point. And there's,
Yes, no,
and there's
yeah.
a registration of intent. If that makes sense. It's a little bit of soothsaying for sure, but,
Carl, I think the only way that that last one, that fifth one, could make any sense would be if you address it through setback. Because I don't think there's anything in the bylaw that deals with distances between uses. You have minimum side yard setback. For example, if you had 2 residences, the closest a residence can be to the lot line that divides them is 10 feet. So the minimum distance between uses would be 20. I
Okay,
think that is probably what it's indicating, but you got to think about it in that term, because I don't think you'll find anything collated anywhere or identified anywhere that talks about the distance between uses.
well, and I
right.
wasn't gonna try and get pedantic,
yeah, I did,
but
yeah.
the use, this has helped me with definitions. The use is the land, right? Not the house on the land. And so the way I read this is if I have a R30 house, one, and then another one, it says I gotta have a space between the 2 lots that is in the void.
That's why I think it doesn't make any sense to
Right.
talk about uses.
Yeah,
The use
yeah.
goes with the land, not the house
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
land.
there's-
So this to me said there's a void in space.
I see what you're saying, that between the lots, because the lots are the use, not the
Yes.
building is the use.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what
Yeah,
I
yeah.
thought.
Yeah, maybe the whole sentence should come out.
Well, there are side setbacks set forth.
Yeah, but I think what Carl is saying, that the use is attributed to the lot.
Right.
And if you say that there's a minimum distance between the uses, then you've gotta have a separation between the lots, which doesn't exist unless in
Yeah.
those instances where there are paper streets. But,
So that's why I was confused by this sentence, and I,
yeah. Yeah, there is a fair amount of sort of nonsense.
but again, because we're not trying to do substantive changes,
Right.
I didn't
Yeah.
pick on that.
Yeah, okay. Point well taken, though. Lots of points well taken. So, were there any other comments, questions?
So my last comment then, if there aren't any more, I'm okay with all the work that Jane did. The only suggestion I would make is, before we make a decision on number 3 of 621, maybe there's somebody you could talk to on the zoning board and just make sure, rather than,
Just arbitrarily.
yeah, hey, here's how we're interpreting, maybe you could negotiate with them
Well, I think
some wording that they like.
talking with someone on the ZBA about all of their notes would be,
Oh, that's okay too,
considerate
but
thing to
yeah,
do.
everything else was sort of resolved. I think the
Yeah,
only one that was
yeah.
unresolved
But I
was,
think letting them know what our thinking is on some of their questions is the courteous thing to do.
Yes, absolutely.
and then we still have the workshop, the substantive workshop at some other,
Correct, that, and then we have the hearing for Article 6 next Monday. So, if after today I submit to the ZBA, what you guys were thinking, how you felt about it, and they have other comments, there's still some time to address them, even though
so
it's
are
not
we,
a-
are we having a public hearing on Article 6?
on Monday,
It's been advertised,
yes.
oh, so we have to be done by next month.
So next Monday, huh?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, I'm out of town. Good timing, huh? Okay,
Well,
We've
thank you for
received some
doing this.
interest.
I know this is a lot of hard work.
but I hope I can get to talking to the head of the ZBA before I leave, so.
We can continue the public hearing at a later date as well, too. If there are questions or something that you have to answer or get involved in if they come up at the first public hearing.
Okay. Yeah, I just think a conversation with the ZBA is,
Would be helpful.
yep.
Yeah. Okay. So we leave it as approval with the noted corrections pending input from the ZBA on that one concern. And then we have to get a hold of them, discuss that that particular question,
Yeah,
and then be
I'll
ready
try
to
and,
vote on this,
yeah, I'll try and
accept it.
reach out to them if that's okay with you.
It is.
To just go over what we've talked about, particularly with regard to their questions.
Mm-hmm, okay. That sounds good. Okay, Article 15, site plan review. Discussion of content.
So unless Ken wants to, I can take a lead here and give you some background. And then we could maybe go through it piece by piece.
Yep.
So last early fall, Richard Swenson, our previous chair, working with Ken, I think, began rewriting Article 15. I joined in toward the end of that process, sort of proofreading and adding my thoughts. What I sent out today, I forgot to send it out earlier. Mr. Swenson had prepared a list of his thoughts, which he called errata, outlining the changes and what his thinking was. So I provided that. So we could sort of walk through the document. And I have made subsequent to that, after Mr. Swenson had left, additional notes and comments, which I'll mention, which haven't been provided to anyone yet. But let's walk through it and see. Any thoughts on that? Ken, did you have anything to say? I know you worked with Richard on this a lot, too.
Yeah, and there were a couple of questions of procedure that were trying to be addressed in it, as well as the taking out the protocols, the items that more appropriately are in the rules and regulations rather than in the zoning bylaw.
Yeah, and I thought we actually had
comes-
started that document, but I can't find it, so.
And it would essentially it would be the content of the site plan review taken verbatim from the site plan review and put into the rules and regulations.
Okay.
If I could make just a couple comments, you know, as you go forward, I think it is really interesting and important to think about the difference between the bylaws and the regulations. I think it would be helpful if you and Ken could articulate what you see as the difference there and what we should be looking at moving between the documents. I also think, just as a matter of drafting, it's really a good idea never to have the same thing in two places, or even something similar in two places, because whatever small differences that somehow have sneaked in there will be misunderstood by somebody. And it's, you know, if we can figure those out and either eliminate them or move them to one place, I think that would be helpful.
That again, I think, great, I agree. But that goes to the whole discussion of substantive changes
Right.
versus, and I'll point at least some of those out where we have duplicative site plan types of material.
Yeah, and I think also, to the extent that we can make clear what it is that the ZBA and the planning board are doing, to me, it gets a little bit mashed together. And if I were the ZBA, I might feel as if I'm a little bit of a footnote in this document. But would be, I think, helpful to clarify that.
Okay, I can. All right, I'll take a whack at that, and then Ken can correct me everywhere I am wrong. So rather than going through Article 15 first, let me answer that question second. In my view, the roles of the ZBA versus the roles of the planning board, particularly with respect to site plan review and special permit, are most clearly called out in Article 320, the use table. And in my mind, everything flows from there. That sort of says who does what, and then the bylaws say how do you do it. I would agree that with regard to site plan review, special permit, the role between the zoning board of appeals and the planning board is a bit muddled, or was a bit muddled. I think what Richard tried to do, and if you read his errata, was trying to clarify that here. Another place where it was a bit muddled was in the solar bylaw. That's section 590, which I'll talk about in a bit. And we attempted to clarify that as well, pulling, and we did discuss that with the ZBA ahead of time, trying to make it clear that for most uses, the planning board we're trying, I think the trend, at least the work that I was doing, was to move site plan special permit to the planning board in most, if not all, cases. There are still some cases in the use table where it goes to the ZBA, and there's a couple of cases where it could go either way. So that's still an area for additional work. But I would think that that's how I'm flowing through. I start with the use table and say, okay, this use in this district, here's who it goes to, and it's codified in that table.
Seems like it might make sense to get something that indicates that you should look in the use tables to find that information in the admin article, which is, in my mind, way late in this document. It's
Okay.
Article 14.
All right, so that's an area. Yeah, Article 14 is where a lot of,
Administration, and I think that should be up at the
like
very,
Article 1. yes.
very beginning.
Yeah.
You know, right after general provisions, do administration,
Yeah.
and in that Article 14, say, look at the use tables for clarification of who has.
Right, and Article 14 is on our agenda for improvement, and Ken fortunately has the lead on that. He did most of the work there. What I was going to say, and again, I think this mostly comes from my discussions with Ken, in the past, I think what they were trying to distinguish when separating site plan review between planning board and zoning board was they seemed to be putting everything in the industrial, commercial over to the ZBA and residential to the planning board. I don't know what the rationale was for that, and Mr. Buckland could weigh in and make sure I learned from him correctly.
Well, that's mainly how Table 320 comes out. The purpose of a site plan review was to analyze the use of a property by whichever board has the jurisdiction on it. So if it's a Board of Appeals, then they should do the site plan review. If it's the planning board, then they should do the site plan review. It was basically a distinction between whichever board had the jurisdiction under Table 320 was responsible for doing the site plan review.
So that's where it started. So then, looking at Article 15, I think if the intent was, again, much like Ms. Gleason said, fix things that within the article, within the confines of the article, not going beyond, to fix numbering and
Not yet.
things that didn't necessarily make sense. I'm going to pull up the errata sheet.
Can I actually ask a really basic question that maybe we can answer that before diving into the text? Can you explain to me why the words "with special permit" are added after site plan review? And let me explain why I asked that question, because in my mind, it's sort of been these two distinct things. There's site plan review and there's special permits. And in reading this, this language muddies that water.
Okay, so I'm going to answer, and then I'm going to, again, look to Mr. Buckland to clarify. First of all, in Mass General Law, site plan doesn't exist in Mass General Law. It's mentioned, but there's no specific laws. The only thing that exists is special permit in Mass General Law. That's correct, Charlie. I'm looking at Charlie.
Correct, yeah.
Yes.
That's right.
So and actually, I took one of those classes that you and I talked about.
Yeah.
And they talked about there's some dislike in the Attorney General's office if you try and do too much with site plan. So I think with our bylaw, what we tried to do was sort of get around the concerns by saying every site plan requires a special permit. And that's the reason I interpreted it's written this way. So this, for site plan review, special permit is sort of saying, if you've got a site plan review, you have to get a special permit. And that's my simplistic interpretation of the reason we worded it the way we did.
Okay.
And that's correct. The idea was that the site plan review doesn't have any real, something that's provable, that you have to approve in any regard. And the special permit is something that is discretionary, control over it. And so this particular site plan review, which a lot of towns just have a site plan review without a special permit. But in the town of Wareham, you had decided previously to add in the special permit as a criteria for issuing a site plan review.
So keeping them together gives us some legal enforceability over a site plan.
So I almost wonder,
That's correct.
I'm just thinking about and this is just some speculation, just thinking about the trying to simplify this document and wondering if maybe we do something like coming up with site plan special permit. And, it takes out 2 of the 6 words.
Okay, then there's other places that we have to go and,
Right, and it has, I was looking at this and I was thinking, oh my God, that means that all of Article 3, all the tables in Article 3 need to be brought up to speed with this.
but the key is we want to make sure that these site plans require a special permit.
Okay, clear.
It may not be that you want to do that, actually, though. Originally, this bylaw was set up as a two-stage type of a review. There was a minor review and a major review. And the major review had a special permit, and the minor review didn't. It essentially was changed at some point in the past to make it all special permit. But you could have a small project that you don't necessarily want to have to put through a special permit that you could allow to occur without having that extra layer of responsibility.
I think the reason that came about was because when it said it was a minor site plan review and a major site plan review, and the cutoff was 5,000 square feet of building area. So everybody was coming in with 4,999 square feet and going with a minor site plan review. Whereas they really needed, for what they were doing, was a major site
6,000,
plan
right,
review.
yeah. Yep.
So that was eliminated and basically said, the way that it reads today, that essentially everybody, if it's a new or a change in use and so forth, you needed a site plan review. And they got away from that because it was being undercut so many times. That goes back probably 20 years.
I
And
have no more
hence-
suggestions.
Hence, you have a horse that was designed by committee and looks like a camel. And
Called a camel, it's
Yeah,
got a
yeah.
hump and it bites and it spits and, yeah, it's mean as all get out, right.
okay, so those are some
Those were observations.
historical antecedents,
yeah.
but that's the reason that some of it looks the way it does. So in Article 15, there were no substantive changes, just some formatting changes. I note that there's 2 typos, Monique. At least in the copy that I'm working, the Word copy that I'm working from. At the end of the second paragraph, it's missing a period. And number 6 under the 3rd paragraph has a 1 at the beginning of mine. I have the Word document. I'm not looking at what you... Is there a 1 there in number 6?
Yeah, there is.
Right before the word coordination?
There's not on this one.
I think I'm confused. Sorry. So what are you working off of right now?
The Word document that I originally had. I know that you blended it all together in another document, so if you have I haven't reconciled what you had with the last version that I was working on.
Okay. Okay. Makes sense.
The one that I have, Carl, is one that was labeled proposed, and this goes back a ways.
Yes, that's the one that,
But it has that one in front of the coordination in item 6, under section
have that.
1510.
I thought I sent you the Word copy that I had, but we haven't reconciled that. All right, so let's just go through it. You and I can do that after the fact, because there's,
Okay, great.
so this was just trying to clarify the purpose. Introduced some site plan review with special permit wording, and that was the only changes there between the original and the current working copy.
One question, Carl. Throughout the document, there are references to site plan review under section 1510. And, like, for example, well, at least in the draft I have on the next page, it says SPR, SPs under this section 1510. And it's, the reference to 1510 seems to me to be incomplete. It would seem to be a reference to Article 15.
Yeah,
That
and I
should be
think that was, I have to go back and look, but I think that was the previous wording that was not corrected.
right, yeah.
So
I'm sure.
we should highlight that and look to fix that. Yes, that happens in a couple of places. And I'm not sure that section 1450 is still the current section from Article 14 either. Those are, I flagged those to go double check. As I said, Richard sort of stopped working on this when he transitioned off, and it's the copy that I have. Where did you get your copy from, Monique?
The only thing I have is the Article 15 errata sheet. And
Well, no, you included a revised Article 15 in your package. Where did you, I'm just saying, where did you get
you
that
know
from?
what? That was from Mr. Buckland.
Oh, okay.
There was
Hey,
no
Ken.
revised Article 15.
And that's the
in my
one I
packet.
have.
There was originally in the one that was sent out, the one that had
That had
all
the-
five
Documents.
five documents in
The
it.
cover was from some other town, I can't remember what,
Yeah, yes.
and it was a
Napontet.
thick.
All right, so I thought I had sent you this Word document, Monique. I will resend that to you. I thought that was what you had included in your package.
Carl, the
Okay.
date with that
Only-
proposed one was 12/5/21.
That was the sort of the last date that I met with Richard. And that was right before he retired. All right, well, let's go through it, and we'll fix it, and there's going to be more comments. 1520, I think the intent there was to begin trying to break up the section so that it made some more sense. We're talking about site plan review and special permit and granting authority. And it was beginning to try and clarify, did the zoning board do it or did the planning board do it? So applicability originally was the 10 parking spaces or development on any site with 30 acres or greater. Those were the two major criteria that this bylaw considered, or a change of use. I think there's probably some others we might want to consider, but those are the two triggers: 30 acres or 10 or more parking spaces. And that's pretty much the way it was. That's not a change. Or number 2 says, if it says you need a site plan review in the use table, you need a site plan review with special permit. So that's what that says. And then, as Sherry pointed out, that last paragraph was attempting to bring together all the relevant laws and bylaws, but under this section 1510 doesn't really make sense, because this isn't 1510 It really should say, I think, Article 15. And then I have to check 1450.
1460 is the special permit right now.
Yeah, I noted, I flagged it because I thought the numbering had changed, so. And if you notice, even in this one, the numbering's gonna have to change because some things got dropped off and the numbering didn't get updated again. 1522 is trying to describe who does what, and again, it has under section 1510. It calls out Article 3, a comprehensive permit under Mass General Law 40B, or a variance is required. I didn't change that. And that says the zone, if those were the conditions, the ZBA would be the special permit granting authority. And then again, it calls out Article 3, specific zoning districts, general bylaws. It just calls out other people may grant special permits without calling out specifically what those are. So those. Go
I
ahead.
want to point out a problem with the format of this right now, the 10 parking spaces. Unfortunately, Article 9 is in a sorry shape as well, too. And Article 9 is the parking requirements that are considered. We don't have all the uses listed in that table, and we don't have an up-to-date parking demand requirement for all the uses either. Just to note that there's other sections that are impacted by this as well.
Okay, 1530.
Before we get there, Carl, it seems like 1521 and 1522 should basically cover the same territory, but with responsibility carved out for the ZBA and for the planning board. And it's not clear to me that they are coterminous, that they cover the same subject matter, but I just highlight that for something for us to look at. I'm sure this is from the original document.
Yeah, I think Richard just tried to break it into those two
Yeah.
groupings, but without adding any substantive improvements or corrections
Yeah.
or updates. So I will agree, as you read this, anyone who reads this is going to have the same problems that I had reading Article 6.
Yeah.
And we do what? So,
Carl, I think under that 1522, under item 1, it talks about site plan application and the special permit granting authority being the planning board, except for these things.
right.
Then the next line under that says, the SPR, SPGA under section 1510 of this bylaw shall be the Wareham Zoning Board of Appeals. You just got through saying up in the first paragraph that the planning board is the SP. So what that line refers to, I think, is A, B, and C. But the way it's written in this paragraph, you don't know really what it's
I
referring
actually,
to.
in my notes, have the words "in these instances," comma, written in front of the SPGA under section 510 of the bylaw shall be the
I would think that,
zoning board of appeals.
take that line
And
and put it up under
so-
number 1.
Well, so if you say "in these instances," it refers to A, B, and C.
Yeah, that needs
So-
clarification there.
If you send that to me, we'll try and fix that. The goal was exactly that. Here's where the planning board operates. Here's where the zoning board operates. And oh, by the way, there's a couple of cases where the select board, I think there's a case or so where the select board may have a role in a special
So
permit.
just the words "in these instances." Yeah. All right, I can send that to you.
Yeah, okay. All right. Getting to 1530 starts to talk about the more substantive parts of the process. And this this is an example of where we could begin to move procedural items, right, Ken? These things are procedural.
This is content of the application, and like under the section 1532 in the existing bylaw, it has a list of existing features to show. And it has a long list of features. Well, you may want more than that, or you may not need all that are shown on the list. The problem is if it's in the zoning bylaw, you have to include it because you'd need a variance if you didn't. If it's in the rules and regulations, you can waive it as needed or ask for other content as well. It makes the process a little bit more unique to each application as it comes forward to the board.
So, this is actually, I think, a good example of what I think Sherry was talking about earlier, where you don't want to put lists of things, you don't want to duplicate them. So I wonder if we want to take the list out of here. It references the site plan review application and requirements. So by reference, I think that those are part of the substance of this, and have that list be in the application only.
And then the application
and then
needs
if
to be
it's-
updated. I
if
mean,
it
if you
gets-
look at the application, that's woefully old as
Yeah,
well.
but I think that if it's, I think this kind of information needs to be in one place.
Okay, I agree. And the advantage of moving it to the rules and regulations is it's easier to change and update. You don't need to go to town meeting.
Right,
To
we
change
just-
that.
We can do it here.
We can do it here. So,
I think you'd have to, in order to make that effective, though, in the application package, you would have to include some sort of a statement that says that the planning board may waive the information that's required in any particular application for good cause, or something to that effect.
or we could actually say that in the bylaw that says the applicant has to complete the application package and aspects of the application package may be waived.
That's probably a more appropriate place to put it, is in the bylaw. And,
Well,
but-
either place, you're right, it needs to be noted.
Yeah, it needs to be specified, otherwise, you know, you don't know what you're gonna get.
Yeah, that seems like something appropriate for the
That-
bylaw.
but that becomes substantive change, I think.
Altered, amended, enhanced, something like that.
I did note on 1531 and number 12 that this didn't make it in. We need electronic copies, so that should say 14 plus 1 electronic. I don't know why. Do you need 14, Monique? How many do you need these days?
No, can I have, I think 8,
There's some other
9.
places where it says 8.
9 would be great. Well, now that I'm here, you know, so.
Okay, plus at least 1 electronic of the entire package.
Yes.
So we can make that 9 plus electronic. Then it goes on to say, like Ken pointed out, existing features. And it begins to enumerate that. And you're right, some of this, if we could move to a procedure document and the application. But such plans are to include but are not limited. But the problem is we don't say what other kinds of things may be required. The same thing with the development plan. It's looking for what it's looking for. Vehicular circulation, pedestrian circulation, parking.
Shouldn't parking reference Article 9?
Yes, that's again, it may be a case of where we have conflicting or,
Yeah. Yeah, 1546 just sends you directly to Article 10.
it doesn't say Article 10, but it should.
1546 does.
Oh, and yours, my copy doesn't say
All
Article 10.
site plans shall be subject to the landscaping requirements of Article 10 of the Wareham zoning bylaws, and that's
Right.
the only text under that heading.
All right, the copy that I have doesn't say that, so
Okay.
So we're not even all working from the same versions of the draft, which we'll work to get to before
We'll
we
get there.
finalize
We'll
this.
get there. I do have a question on vehicular circulation. Local streets shall not be over-designed or overbuilt, and their appearance shall be appropriate to their use. What does that mean, over-designed and overbuilt?
Means making too much pavement. You don't need all that pavement.
Where are you reading that, Jane?
Then, in item 3, under 1543.
1543?
1543-3.
Designed or overbuilt.
I mean, I would say, local streets shall not be oversized. Over-designed, that means they spent too much time fussing over, you know, do they line up the aggregate in nice neat rows, or? That's over-designed to me. Overbuilt means that it's, you know, 12 inches of asphalt. Doesn't
Airplane
mean that
road,
it's
yeah.
necessarily wider. So I think that probably the words oversized would be more appropriate here, or something to that effect. Anyway,
If
that
we're
was
talking
just-
about streets, it doesn't belong here.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
the only time we get new streets is through a subdivision plan, right?
That's correct.
So,
So it's in the wrong place anyway.
yeah.
So maybe just leave it alone.
There-
It's
I know that there are
totally
sections,
ambiguous in my
there are
mind.
sections in the bylaw, especially that general commercial district, where the idea was that you were going to have secondary roads and bypass roads. It was intended for large acreage.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where this would come into play.
Yeah,
But in general terms, you don't do anything with layouts under the site plan review or under the zoning bylaw. You do it under subdivision control.
it's occurring to me that the original document that I think this is based on, that has been cut and pasted and Band-Aid and things stuck in there with duct tape, I think the original was put together at a time that Makepeace was coming to the town with
With grand plans.
huge plans for planned development.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where this is coming from.
And we should anticipate that that may yet happen,
It may, but that's,
but so we don't want to
that's
avoid it.
not,
Yeah.
that was first and foremost
Yeah.
in our minds at the time.
Well, even though the line makes no sense and really has no place, there's no detriment to it being there.
Right. There, it doesn't, it's not helping.
Well, the planning board gets to interpret it and say what it means.
Carl, going back to
Go
the
ahead.
development plan under 1533, item 15 talks about new contour lines. It's got it at 2-foot intervals, and I don't think that that's appropriate. New development, it needs contours at a much smaller interval than that, especially when you're doing a lot of paved areas and curb lines and things like that. You don't get the detail that you need for analysis. So, perhaps a way to say it would be at appropriate intervals, and that would give some flexibility to the planning board to look at it and say, well, you know, you're designing areas with very flat grades. We can't tell where the contours are going, where the runoff is going, that type of thing. You need to improve that.
Yeah.
But to specify it, particularly at 2-foot intervals, it's not a good thing to do.
Yeah, so speaking to that idea and then generalizing it, one of the things that I think Article 15 would benefit by, and it's the concept of a preliminary design review, which is usually conducted with the planning office, and details like that. If we formalized a preliminary design review, those details could be specified during that process. But we don't have a formal design review process.
And even if you do, it can only be a recommendation to your board.
Correct, but at least then that's an opportunity to coach the applicant on things like contour lines and
I think your idea about a preliminary development plan, it isn't always necessary, but it certainly would be helpful.
in some of the larger projects.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
I think it's gonna help the developer avoid unnecessary expense redesigning something
Yeah.
when he could have gotten some constructive feedback right up front.
Right, but then that puts more work on the planning office, and it's not codified yet in our process.
Monique doesn't mind.
Can I ask a question? 1530 in the one that I've got says information required, and then it has this bulleted list, and that's all of 1530, and then it goes to 1540. But I know that you guys are talking about 1531, 1532, 1533,
Right, we need to get so we're not gonna be able to do this in one thing. We need to decide what the latest version is.
Yeah.
I think it's the December 5th, 2021 document, but we can confirm that with Ken. But that's what Charlie and I have, and I thought that's what we had distributed.
So is most of this 1531 through 4 information that's gone into the application?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, but we
So it's
need to get on
On the same
the same page with that.
Yeah.
So because in my copy, if we go back to 1534, which is the impact statement, the version I have said this needs better specifics.
Yeah, that's what I have too.
I noted groundwater, stormwater, noise, cultural heritage, endangered species for the impact statement. All right. And then later on, I noted, we spent quite a bit of time in doing the solar bylaw, section 593, because of the problems, mostly that I felt, but the bylaw committee felt. We wrote a detailed list of design requirements that I think we should all look at and either consider bringing back into the site plan review or into the procedure document in 593.1 through 593.16 from the August or the April 25th meeting. Some of them are specific to solar, so you could forget those, but we addressed things like cultural heritage, all the things that a lot of the community members keep bringing to us that we at least should consider. And then somewhere along the way, we're going to talk about, and it's one of my to-dos, writing a statement that says all stormwater plans need to be developed using the most current models and standards available in the industry or in the law, not 1960s tables and things like that. So and make it more self-adjusting, so that as new information comes out, well, that's
That's the new standard.
that's what you should be referring to. So it should say the most current recognized
Standards.
datas and standards. So that needs to weave into here as well. But if you get a chance, look at the bylaw 593 from the April 29th or the April 25th warrant, and we tried to enumerate all of the things that we had heard that people were saying, well, you didn't look at this and you didn't look at that. And again, the idea would be maybe they're relevant or not, but at least you can say you have to address this concern. Okay. Relation to other, okay, so landscaping is Article 10. The next is 1550, and this has been a point of discussion at most of our meetings. This actually, 1561 was deleted and moved. 1562 actually begins to introduce the concept of a preliminary site plan review, and it's under procedures. And again, this whole section could be moved to a procedures document and out of the bylaw conceivably. But this is where we began to try and discuss the idea, having the applicant meet with the planning office before we get a whole thing submitted and find out that it's not necessarily complete. And I know Ken has always done this informally, but this was maybe a more formalized process. Talks about the application. Again, here it says 14. I think we can reduce that to 9 per Monique and 1 electronic. Again, why we've repeated the number, this paragraph here, not clear. So-
Can you tell me if there's more reference and more specificity about what's expected of the pre-application review somewhere? Is there language about
This is the
that?
first time we sort of began to introduce it.
Okay. Because I wonder if there's a document like.
Did I jump
like
ahead? I
the-
think I missed a page.
Like the application
bef-
form that should inform people about what's expected for the
Yeah.
pre-application review.
That's where we were getting to procedures, but I think I jumped ahead. I apologize. Somehow we got to 1560. I forgot to turn my page over. 1550 was really, so I apologize. 1551 is the whole concept of we need a ruling from the Conservation Commission prior to finalizing site plan with special permit. And this has caused a bit of confusion. But this is very clear, and so far has been quite important procedurally in that it's the first case that I'm aware where we're trying to tie the action of two boards together formally. And I know that it's created some confusion between the two boards about timing. But at least I think until we figure that out better, having this absolute hard requirement gives the applicant notice that you need to go to the Conservation Commission every single time and either get an RDA that says there's no application or there is wetlands.
Well, in a less hard and fast manner, it does a similar thing with 1565.2, review by town officials, and it gives this whole list.
Yeah,
of-
that's, I was going to come to that in a minute.
That's not required, but it's,
The problem with, and I have a comment there, the problem with that section is if they don't act,
then it's passed.
it's passed. And one of the things that we don't always do in our procedure and in our boards or in our meetings when we get an application is to ask the planning office to tick off, did we hear, did we hear, did we hear? And my concern is if we rely on, you don't hear anything, that's what happens.
Why would the communication between us and the Conservation Commission be that difficult when Dave sits 10 feet in front of her?
I can't answer that question.
You would think it would be,
It's getting much better because we've been insisting on it, and,
it'll become the norm.
well, it has become the norm in the last year. Would you say, Ken? I mean, there's no doubt that we look for this every time, right?
Yeah, we do, and it helps us get a determination from the Conservation Commission. It would help us if we said that other town officials have to make their case as well too, if there's anything that they want to notify us about the project, such as the fire department or Board of Health. But one thing I would caution you on in making it an absolute requirement is the concept of double jeopardy, where you have to get an approval from one board before you get an approval from another board.
I don't think Carla was alluding to them having to have an approval from Conservation, just a ruling as to whether or not they were to be involved or not.
Or the order of conditions. But the only question I have on that, Ken, is this is already past AG review. This is not something we're newly introducing.
I know you were talking about adding other town officials to.
No, I wasn't making that substantive change. That's why that's in a separate place.
All right, we'll find out if the AG lets this one go by as well, too.
Well, it's
Anyway.
already, this is not new, so it's in our current bylaw.
Right. But if we modify it and present it again to the Attorney
Oh,
General, they're going to
then
get
she
another
could,
shot at it.
I missed that last time.
And she can kick it.
One of the reasons that it's been a little bit difficult is that Conservation Commission sometimes looks for the same sort of information that you're looking for, especially if stormwater is involved. There have been a number of times when I have copied the conservation agent with my report so that they'd have it to look at. So, you know, it does make it difficult to put it in there that you must receive specifically an order of conditions or resource area delineation. Those are two separate things, by the way, before you will actually approve the plan. And I know you don't like to do conditional approvals, but it's the only option that I can think of because it tends to delay it because they look at things from their perspective and you look at things from your perspective, and sometimes they're intertwined. If you can develop a process in the preliminary stage of a project where representatives from the Conservation Commission and the Planning Board get together to review the preliminary plan, you could then figure out what aspects of the plan are going to be controversial for both and see how you could settle on those. But I understand your frustration with it because you're having to wait, but at the same time, it becomes cumbersome for them too because they're waiting sometimes.
Yeah, well, I'm not frustrated at all by needing to wait. I think the way we handled, Fearing Hills, you take a break, let them rule, and then, and what they're waiting for often is the final site plan, the final layout, your stormwater stuff.
Yeah, and so
That goes-
they're
that
waiting
goes-
for you, you're waiting for them. and
Well, I don't
it
think
makes
we
it-
ever get to waiting for them until the very end.
Well, I guess it depends on who's on first base and who's on second at the particular time.
Yeah, but you're right, the two boards interrelate, and I don't know how to do it.
Well,
We could do a conditional
I'm
approval.
suggesting that at a preliminary stage might be a good idea where you could iron out those things,
And-
so you know what to expect coming or going forward.
That's great. That then happens outside of the public hearing.
No, not any more than the preliminary, if you're
Well,
saying
that
you have
does,
a
yeah,
preliminary
that-
application conference, you're doing that outside of a public hearing.
I agree, that does happen outside the public hearing. So I'm open to how to improve it. This is what the bylaw, begins to become a
I'd like to
substantive
point out, too,
change.
the relationship to other special permits. There are two separate things that you're dealing with in terms of when an application gets submitted to the planning office. One thing is whether or not the application is complete,
Right,
whether the application includes all of the details that are required for a submittal. That's one thing. But the second half of it is something that I think relates, and this is my own personal opinion and how I see things, is it relates more to your board than it does the planning office. Because you people are the ones that are going to be hearing the presentation, you're the ones who are going to be hearing the public, you're going to be looking at the plans in detail. So to decide whether or not one particular aspect of the plan is appropriate, I think belongs more here than it does in the planning office checking off.
Yeah, I agree.
Other than the fact that if you've got right now you've got a checklist, does it include all these items? And everybody puts a check mark side of the yes. Sometimes it's accurate, sometimes it isn't. But I think that type of thing belongs with the planning office to make sure that when they receive something, it qualifies for an actual submittal in a public hearing.
So
Seems
if,
that everything on the list should be, the applicant should be required to identify all of those pieces so that
Right.
it makes the review for the
Which
planning
they,
office easier.
which they do, when you look at the applications, a lot of time, and there are two separate lists, by the way, I think they probably could be joined together or one eliminated.
Yeah.
And it simply says, you've either submitted this or you haven't. Sometimes when they say no, they give a reason why. But I think that is the kind of thing which could be readily handled with the planning office, with the details of what's there left to your board when it's either filed and/or with the preliminary discussion that you have here.
Do we, if we put a process in place where we do, the planning office handles all of the details of the application, then they hand off to us for a preliminary review, does that put us in jeopardy of a timeline issue? Do we
No.
start chewing up time that we really
No,
don't have?
I don't believe so, because all that is, it's non-binding, first of all. At least, we're talking really about design review, that
Right.
kind of thing.
Right.
It's a non-binding kind of thing, but it simply means that you have to do that, and it helps you to iron out some of the basics of the project before you actually get to the public hearing and get to the actual filing.
But
And I don't think that affects your time review.
It doesn't. So
timeline.
the
I don't
calendar,
believe so.
doesn't the calendar start clicking the second they submit the application? Right. So we start burning days the day that you say, yep, you've satisfied all the items on the checklist.
It depends on how you set it up, Mike.
Yeah, if we did the design review before they submitted the application to the clerk, then the clock doesn't start.
Right, that's what I was getting at, and I think that's where it would happen, we'd have to have that happen that way.
And I would say that that would then need to be codified, and we would have to then call out the need for a design review, and to protect ourselves. And then you could word it perhaps such that if the applicant chooses to avail themselves of a design review, it's in everybody's best interest for large, complex projects.
But if they decide that they're
If they want to go right to,
right to the public meetings and site plan review, then so be it. They run the risk of us basically redesigning their project and costing them money with their architects.
Personally, I'd like to see it a requirement.
okay, I was trying to be a little
I'm
softer,
just-
but yeah.
Yeah.
But
Well,
So
I think that opens the door for a lot of issues that could be dealt with early on, and probably should be dealt with early on. So that, for example, well, take any project in the conference recreational. Let's suppose you had 3,000 acres in the conference recreational district, and somebody comes in with a project. Establishing the density of that project early on is an important thing, the way I see it, so that that gets established. And then you can go to the details of how that's all going to be incorporated together. If you wait until the last minute to decide on the density,
Yeah.
that makes it very difficult for the applicant, because now his project is in jeopardy of having to be completely redesigned.
Correct, right.
Whereas those things, once they're settled, then everybody's happy with exactly how many units there will be in a given area, then you both will know what you're working with. So it's things like that that I think are important to the preliminary aspect to settle first.
So how do you make a design review part of the application process? I mean, is it just wording on the
no,
application?
I think you have to codify it
I'm
in the
just saying-
bylaws.
Isn't
You
that
don't-
part of
you
the
don't vacate it.
pre-application review?
You don't
Huh?
vacate
Isn't
it.
that part of the pre-application review?
Well, that's a little, I think it needs more words
It
than
needs
that.
to be fleshed out.
yeah.
It shows up in one little place.
Yeah, I do think that Mass General Law anticipates design review.
It does not, this is a good idea, but you gotta be careful about this, because anything that you make a determination on before you've heard the applicant's position in the public hearing puts you at a jeopardy of, in a legal sense, of predispositioning yourself as to the outcome of the project.
What,
So you have to do this within the framework of the public hearing and the deliberations of the board.
well, what is could we avoid that by maybe not having a complete board in the review, the initial review?
Yeah, well, that's what we've done with some projects. We invited the chairman in with the, in this case, the zoning board of appeals. The chairman was invited in along with the department heads of the agencies in town to review with the developer the project and give them some input as to the issues that they'd have to deal with.
I don't know if I
A
like
number
having
of,
just one
a number of
person.
years ago, those goes back, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, there was a group that was unofficially called the Cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that, Jane?
Yep, I do. It was actually very useful.
Yes, it was. There was the chairman of the planning board, I
was
think.
all the department
All of the
heads.
department heads
It's
were
this-
involved in
this
getting
l-
together with an applicant, and he showed his
this
preliminary
list.
plan and what he proposed. And it was at that meeting that anybody who had concerns voiced those concerns. For example, if there were conservation issues, the agent may say, look, this is within a wetland area, it's in a flood zone, you're gonna have to look at those portions of the bylaw when you come before us. And that puts him on notice that he's gonna have to do it. In the case
That would
where,
then solve that whole need for the,
yeah,
It was
it worked for as long as
enormously
it was working.
helpful
Yeah.
on
Well, why did we
projects that I
drop
was
it?
working on. I don't know. It was tough to get all those.
coordinate?
Yeah, it was tough to coordinate because it's basically this list of departments and the fire chief was there, the police chief was there, somebody from the water department, someone from the health department.
Yep.
And they just
Well,
sort of
could
got a
you-
walkthrough and, yeah.
Could you avoid the difficulty of getting all of those people on the same page, on the same night, at the same time, by removing the fact that it had to be a department head and just a representative?
It was generally held during the daytime,
Yeah, it
Well, I
was- it
understand that,
was-
but there's a perfect example.
which,
I work.
which made it, most people were on the job during the daytime, so they set a date and everybody got together.
That's great, but like I said, I work. So having that
Understood.
meeting during the daytime doesn't work for me. But if we took the whole department head thing out of it and just said a representative of, then Carl could be there, or Jane,
Yeah,
or
so I
Sherry,
think
or
actually
anybody.
that at the time, it was town employees, it was not board members when that was going on. So I don't know how it tied to the planning board, because obviously the planning board
well, the
has always
planning
been
office
volunteer.
then could represent the ZBA.
Right,
and-
yeah, so town planner would be there, right.
But I think, I mean, I love the concept.
Well, I think
it
they
worked.
tried to get to that with, you gotta give us a letter from each of these. They tried to get to that
Yeah,
point, but I don't know, how often do we occasionally get letters, some departments?
so you're asking them to write a letter, which,
Yeah.
It's not gonna
that
happen.
right there is just a tough act to get them
Right.
to.
I get more letters from other zoning boards in different towns than I do from anybody within town.
Yeah, yeah. I think having them show up at a meeting and talk about it is probably more likely to happen
But
than
that,
get a
that,
letter.
that becomes a substantive change, it was beyond
Yeah.
what we were.
Yeah, I don't know whatever happened to that cabinet
Just died.
concept. It was a great thing.
Well, we continued it, but without the name. We had just invite the department heads in to review the bigger projects.
I've never been invited.
Well, I don't invite the board members. I only invited the chairman of the Board of Appeals sort of invited himself, actually, because
More
I
the
was
department
concerned
heads
about
than-
the legality of the deliberation occurring before the public hearing and the applicant getting everything on the record.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Again, all of these are challenges that we're facing and that we need to try and improve.
Yeah.
And it's clear from all of our discussion that the relationship between some of these boards and committees is very important, less so others. Right now, it's very important that we hear from the sewer commissioners for everything that comes before us, to make sure we know whether the application is pre-moratorium, post-moratorium, and notwithstanding statements by the applicant, oh, well, we've already gotten that from,
Right.
yeah, well, no, I want to see that in
In
writing, from the sewer, commissioners.
Or from the fire department,
or
or from anybody.
Anybody, yeah, yeah, trust but verify, or.
Trust but verify, exactly.
So yes, it's very important, and particularly in these times, that these boards work together, because a lot of these projects are starting to have material impact on the welfare of our town. Not the ANRs or the,
No, the big projects.
yeah. 1552 just talks about that we can combine site plan with preliminary or definitive subdivision. That gives us the ability to do that. We haven't done that since I've been on the board, but it also notes that just because you get a site plan approved doesn't necessarily mean your subdivision's approved, and vice versa. 1553 talks about authorization by a secondary SPGA. I couldn't interpret it because I didn't understand. We've never done a secondary SPGA, so I'm not sure how to interpret this one, but it's there.
That's the language that's in the old 1564, Carl. And it requires, if the ZBA is the special permit granting authority, because they're also a variance granting authority for a site plan, it says that within 35 days of filing the application, the planning board is supposed to give a report to the ZBA. That's been done in recent years. Generally, it's been a one-night thing where planning board looks it over and then they send a letter through to the ZBA. But
So
that's
is
where that's
Rain
come from.
Car
It's all-
Wash an example of that? That's one of the ones.
Yeah, that's, well, any that the ZBA is the special permit granting authority on, where it involves a variance. It says that the planning board is supposed to report to the ZBA within 35 days.
Yeah, and I'm not sure we're real good about how tight that process is.
Oh, well, I don't think it's been happening, but it's in the bylaw. It's already there.
Yeah, so if you'll see 1564, later on, we didn't get there, was moved here.
1553, just a nomenclature thing. The title, relationship to other special permit or permit authority approvals. Can we add the word granting between permit and authority? So it reads, or permit granting authority approvals.
Does the use table differentiate between primary and secondary permit, special permit granting authorities?
No, I think that's,
Don't think
that's
so.
No,
language.
it differentiates between the
That's
zoning
language I
board and
think
the
Richard
planning
put in
board,
there.
but that's
Okay.
it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just think this section's awfully hard to understand unless you already know what it says.
Mhm.
So, might,
Read the current one, it's just as hard to understand.
Yeah, there- yeah.
Look at my notes here. All right, now we can move on to procedures, which we had started talking about.
are the site plans actually filed at the meetings?
I noted here that we don't do that.
Yeah.
We don't file them at the meetings. They usually go to the clerk and they're brought to us. So that's 1563, the first sentence. Ken, do you have any comments on that? Because in January, we
that's-
filed a bunch of subdivisions at the meeting, but we don't always file a subdivision plan at the meeting. So I'm unclear.
Most times we do file them at the meeting. But it follows the Chapter 40A, Section 9, special permit procedures. Since this is a special permit, we're following the procedures of the state to protect ourselves.
Okay, so it's not clear to me that we're actually doing this, that when we open it, that's actually the filing.
That's right. More to preserve our protections under the state law, we're saying it's when it's filed with the town clerk. Although there are instances where the engineer will file it with the board as well on the night of a meeting.
Doesn't that first paragraph suggest that it gets filed with the planning board, and then it says a copy given forthwith to the town clerk?
That's what that
To me,
actually
that says after you filed it with the planning board, you file a copy of it with the town clerk, and that sets the time frame.
Yeah, my note says I didn't think that's exactly how we do it all the time. I think
No, it's not. Because what happens is, as you said before, they come into the office and with an application, and we review it first to see if it is a complete application. And then if it's a substantial project, we set up outreach to other departments to set up a meeting, or just send around the application in the electronic file to the other departments for their review and input.
But the advantage just is if it was actually filed at the meeting, then we don't lose perhaps 2 weeks from when they file it with the clerk before it gets on our first.
Right, the clock starts with
That's a good
us.
point. That's good.
That opens up some extra time if we need it, for sure.
So that's there. It says that we could do it that way. We don't always do it that way, but that's for discussion. 1564, we talked about that, got moved. Site plan review and approval procedure. This is again another section that could be moved to a procedure document. This gives us the right to hire consultants. This does talk about getting confirmation from a variety of boards, and it has the where's the 21 days? We didn't get to the 21 days yet. Oh, yes, on the next page. I got to remember it's on both sides. The only comment I have is on item 2. It says that if you don't hear in 21 days, it's considered a approval. However, that does not apply to Conservation Commission, even though this seems to say that it does, pursuant to 1551 above. So this is sort of a incomplete statement or inaccurate statement, because certainly it doesn't apply to Conservation Commission. And the other thing is, under item I above, I note that it says that if we don't hear from the town or the consulting engineer within 21 days, which would be Charlie, that doesn't really procedurally flow either. We don't always get Charlie's response within 21 days of that. We don't even necessarily notify him before the whole process starts. So there's some procedural, so if you look above under item I, at least in my copy, it calls out notifying the consulting engineer.
Yeah, you could burn a week of that just getting the 53G set up
Yeah.
to authorize him to
Yes.
go do his work.
Yeah. So it's sort of a gap where the bylaw is inconsistent with real life. in my opinion. The public hearing, 1565.3, talks about all of the timing. I did note in my head that notice of extension it doesn't talk about the continuance process, although I took it under notice of extension. We've talked about the continuance process before and how far in advance we'd like to hear about continuances and our desire to, unless it's a dire emergency, to have the applicant present when we discuss continuances. And my thought on having the applicant present, given that we've just continued the requirement for hybrid meetings or Zoom meetings through the end of the year, it's not a burden on the applicant to participate briefly by Zoom to just process the continuance.
We can always accommodate them by moving any request for continuances to the top of the agenda.
I think that would help
Yeah.
everybody. As we've said, often we've got people in the audience who don't know that it's been continued, that sit there and get frustrated with us.
That's why I've tried to move it to the top.
Yeah, so that's something we could clearly do without any problem, but we haven't codified the requirement. That's something that could be easily in a procedure document that says, if we don't hear from you by this date, we're not going to consider your document, and that's grounds for a continuance. We could do all kinds of procedural things around that, late filings and how to process continuances. But that could all be moved to a well-formed procedure document, which requires some work.
Speaking
Now,
of,
under item 3 above that, a butter notice, if this is a special permit, doesn't it have to have notice according to Chapter 40A, which means abutters and abutters, two abutters within 300 feet?
As long as we do it in accordance with the state law and we cover what's there, we can ask for additional notices to be sent out as well.
Yeah, but this doesn't go out that far, Ken. It only says within 200 feet.
It doesn't work then.
So it needs to be changed, right?
We asked for 300 feet.
Yeah, but this says 200, but it needs to be abutters and abutters to abutters if they're within 300 feet. That's the way the state law
correct.
reads. Yeah.
That's
So
correct.
that needs to change.
Yeah, it shouldn't say all abutters and parties of interest. It should say all abutters and abutters of abutters within 300 feet.
Right.
All right, so that needs to be fixed. And I did note that the last paragraph, that the signed green cards, I brought this up in the past. We don't get, it says that they need to be submitted to the SPGA. We don't get the signed green cards. And they're not necessarily artifacts provided in our decision document. Or enumerated in our decision document. I know the planning office gets them, but
We have them, do you want that?
well, but the point is, this bylaw says that it has to go to the SPGA, and that's different than the planning office. If it goes to the planning office, and then the planning office informs the SPGA that criteria has been met, but that's not what this says.
And it also uses that same language, abutters and parties of interest.
Yes. So that section needs some work. But again, I don't know if that's substantive. That's probably not substantive, but that was more than what was originally taken in trying to clarify this document.
this probably also is as well, but you talked about a procedure document. I think it would be really helpful if we had a procedure document that laid out sort of a time schedule and specific steps that people take. For example, the applicant files some kind of document. The public has X number of days to respond to it, and then the planning board has a
X
meeting
number.
on it, and and the planning board rules. And then we move on and address other issues. I have the feeling that we have issues that come back to us, both from the applicants and from the public, and it would be helpful to find a way to be efficient and also fair with that.
So that's excellent. I think that we need to do that. Before we go on, I have a question for Ken. Is there anything in Article 50, I know we're trying to get this done for Fall Town Meeting. Is there anything in here that we absolutely need for Fall Town Meeting, or do we want to take this on as a longer-term project?
If you don't feel you're ready for it, you can take it on as a longer-term project. I think the zoning bylaws, as Jane said, is a work in progress, and the progress could take a while to actually accomplish.
No, my question was different. Is there anything in here that we've done this
No,
far?
there's nothing in here that is time sensitive.
Okay, so we may want to, after having this preliminary review or another review, decide that it needs more work. And there are other articles that are perhaps more important now that we've reviewed this.
That's the purpose of this workshop, yeah.
Okay. So that may take some of the burden, put more burden on, but less time sensitive.
Less time sensitive.
Burden. 1565.4 talks a little bit about timing. After the close of the public hearing, we either conditionally approve or deny, and we have 60 days to do that, which I think, in my opinion, we should avail ourselves more of than we have in the past, so we have time to deliberate thoughtfully. We don't have to feel rushed into an immediate.
Yeah, a vote right there and then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
This does give us the ability to condition our approvals, and then it talks about 4 copies. There's a question of by who within 20 days and who distributes it, so there's some work there. I think that's the planning office is the by who, but
Carl, I have a concern about that particular issue. Once you have approved your special permit, it goes to the town clerk, and there's a 20-day appeal period on that special permit. So it really doesn't become effective until after the 20 days.
right.
But at some point, the plans that are approved and they're part of the special permit, they really need to be signed by the planning board with a date of the approval, just the way you would with a subdivision plan. Because history shows that sometimes you'll get multiple copies of the plan in the file, and unless they're signed and dated, you don't know which is the correct one. I've had an issue, not recently, but I've had an issue come up to where the final plans that I get are not the final plans that actually got approved and submitted to the planning board, and yet I get requested to go out and make an inspection, and I've got a plan that's not up to date. So I think it's important that you set a time frame for actually getting those plans. Get the 4 sets in here sometime within the 20 days or immediately after the 20-day appeal period is run, and sign those plans and keep them on record so that when the time comes for the inspection, somebody wants to look at an official plan, there it is. This doesn't say much about that, really. It only says you're supposed to distribute 4 sets. Well, 4 sets of what? So I think that's important.
In other communities, it's the planning director that would stamp and sign it, saying that, that this is what was approved at the time. So just FYI.
But all I'm saying is, the planning board, I think, needs to sign all 4 sets. So you've got 2 for your file, 1 set goes to the building inspector, he knows what the final set is, and I or somebody else who's an inspector knows that they're dealing with the actual approved plan.
Or when we go back for an appeal later on, that we know what's at the,
But yeah, if somebody appeals it, then it doesn't matter what the plan says, the project is on hold until the appeal is decided.
right.
But it needs to be specified that your board has signed those plans, and these are the ones that actually were a part of the decision.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying.
Well, I was using the example perhaps of Bay Point. It was very difficult for me to figure out,
Yeah, which set was which.
because they're not closed out yet.
I know.
And I can't, I didn't have an easy time of trying to figure out what the official plan was.
I have, I think, 3 inspection sets, and I've tried to say on my set, approved on such and such a date, so at least I know that those are the ones. But it's not always like that, so.
1566 is fees and expenses. There was a separate fees document that was started, which we can review.
Take it out.
I didn't have any real comments here. This was just,
There's a bit of kind of all over the place with
Yeah.
calling it fixed fees and filing fees, and that could
again,
stand to be.
that was a case of trying to just
Yeah,
bring
oh, I totally get it, yeah. It just seems that that might want to get made consistent.
better, yeah.
And, yeah, that was my big comment on that.
Then we move on to talking about covenant requirements. Wait, make sure I'm turning my pages because they're not numbered. Oh, observation fees, other costs, payment of fees, performance guarantee, all talked about. Covenant requirements, performance bond. There's a lot of detail here that seems all over the place, and not necessarily in an order that makes perfect sense. Talks about the performance bond or deposit release in 1567.5. Somehow I think that needs to be tied back and related to project completion and the COA. Because I think we've talked about inserting a final inspection and certification by the
By the town engineer.
inspecting authority, mostly Charlie, as a requirement before we release the bond, before we give the COA. And we begin to talk about that, but again, it's not clear if you were reading the document front to back that you would see this paragraph if you jumped to the other section. So it's an opportunity for improvement, but it's still in there. Then here's the first time where we talk about revisions to the site plan, where we talk about minor revisions, major revisions, which we've never really sort of discussed with respect to site plans before. In my term on the board in the last year, we haven't done a minor revision or a major revision to a site plan. Oh, well, no, that's not true. Master Millworks, we did that for Master
Well, we
Millworks.
did it for, Danny Warren.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. I apologize. I didn't think of
Did
that.
it for Bay Point too.
And Bay Point, yeah. Forget my lapse. But this says that the zoning enforcement officer decides whether they're major or minor, and I'm not sure we always want that to be the case.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like we put a lot of thought and effort and discussion into deciding whether or not these changes are major or minor. I don't know how that would land on just one person's shoulders.
Right. And it really didn't anticipate what we did for Danny Warren, which is we kind of fenced it off and sort of it's a major minor hybrid. And really there's no mechanism in here to force them to come back for the second part of that review.
Yeah, and again, you're kind of giving carte blanche to one person.
Right.
And I would replace the word needed with sought. They're seeking
That
to
would
change
work.
them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Could be discretionary, it could be, so needed, it seems.
Yeah, it seems a little definitive, yeah.
Okay, and then we get to project completion, which, as I said, I think it also relates back to releasing the performance bond. They may not be entirely hard linked, because it depends on what the bond covered. It may not be the entire project being completed.
Yeah, I would think after what we went through, especially right now with Wareham Retail Management, that I don't know if we would be jumping to release the bond right away.
Right.
There should be a 1-year review and even possibly a reduced bond and a 2-year review.
Yeah, and we could either, the way to handle that could be actually in the covenant itself or in the bylaw. I don't know what's the best place. But I do believe we should begin to introduce the idea of a final inspection sign-off, so that we have data provided to us in order to make those decisions, and data for the zoning officer to make the issuance of the occupancy permit. And if we had a final inspection on Master Millworks, at least a report, and if the prior zoning officer had granted which he did, granted the occupancy agreement, at least we would have the artifact to say, well, that's completely counter to these conditions, and at least he would have that information. So I think we need to introduce the idea of a final inspection report, which could either be in the bylaw or in the procedures. This clearly states that the zoning enforcement officer issues the occupancy permit, talks about best management practices, says the zoning enforcement officer is the authority is the enforcement officer. Again, and then other regulations comes back and talks about the section 1510 again, which I'm not quite sure.
We should be consistent in calling it an occupancy permit or a certificate of occupancy.
Yes. And then there's a statement on decisions. So I think it's 10 after 8. We've gone through the first pass. It's clear that this article needs more work.
Well, it's taken a ton of work already,
Yes.
I'm sure. By the
And
way,
I
that-
think, I do feel supportive of the idea of trying to separate this into a bylaw and a procedure document and an improvement to the application. But that also is a significant amount of work.
Ton of work, yeah.
And I'm not sure that timing-wise that we can pull all that off by town meeting. I'm not sure. But I think maybe we form a subcommittee to move this forward, and we defer the next round of discussions until we've had a group of minds
Spend some time.
spend some time on that. I don't know, what do you think, Ken?
It sounds like a plan. I think we have, we can set our priorities based on the other bylaws that we have a need to amend as well. I'm thinking of the MS4 stormwater bylaws. There may be a need to continue that on until spring town meeting as well, but at least we have a better idea if we go through the bylaws that we're considering amending, and then set our priorities as to what we can accomplish.
Is there anybody who's interested in continuing to work on Article 15?
As long as we can, I get 1 day a week to myself, and I can plan that day any day. It doesn't have to be specific. So as long as we can get together for, a couple of hours and not chew the whole day up, then I'm all in, diving into it.
And can someone from your office, Monique or you, or?
Monique wants to work nights and weekends. Just saying.
She already is.
We'll be there.
Okay, well,
Okay.
all right, so I will continue to work with Mike then, and then, I don't know, Charlie, you can consult and advise.
Do the
Keep
best
us-
I can for the time I got left.
Keep us on
What
the
do you
straight
mean
and
you got
narrow.
left? What's happening?
Well,
That's a statement that we,
Yeah,
I mean,
that's.
that's the
that-
first time I've heard that kind of
That's a
statement.
dark statement, Mr. Rowley.
I've made up my decision that I'm going to retire as of December 31st. I've been doing this
Find
since,
your replacement.
huh?
Find your replacement.
Yeah, I think Charlie and I have been talking about that for quite some time.
Yep.
No, it's been in my mind for several months. I've been doing this since 2011, and I'm getting a little tired. Yeah.
Well, as long as you retire the way Mike retires, then there's no problem.
I don't recommend it.
No,
Well, if,
Yeah.
and, you know, obviously, you're well deserving of retirement, and we appreciate and everything that you do, yes, golf clap. But I would, I guess, reinforce the comments that I've made over the last year or so, that we need to rebuild Charlie Rowley in your likeness in another body. And
they do make three-dimensional things, but they're just solid, to the best of my knowledge. They don't move.
So I would move, just as a comment for the board, that we, you know, we put a full-fledged push on identifying a suitable candidate or two. You know, we may not be able to get you in one body, maybe we need to recreate you in a couple of people.
I had to do this with Mashpee 2 years ago.
Yeah,
So what I did was I put together a summary of what I felt were the requirements for somebody to take this type of a position. There are times when you need the input from a registered land surveyor. There are times, a lot more time, when you need the experience of a civil engineer. So those are the basic criteria. But I'll be glad to share that document with you. It wasn't, you know, specifically to Mashpee, it's just something that I did there, and I've done basically the same thing here. But I'll share that with you. You also have a document that I know that Richard put some time in, that I put together on inspection procedures.
That's been distributed,
yeah,
so.
Okay.
we have that.
But
yeah.
that was clearly just an attempt on my part to put down in writing the various things that I felt were important and to do.
And that the developer.
So it's something that, as a board, you need to go through to see whether there's any things that you think should change and not be in there, or put together some other fashion. But it's something that I've tried to adhere to in the time that I've been the inspector for the board. So that information is there for your use. It could be something that you could use in an appendix, for example, in your rules and regulations, both for subdivisions and for site plan review, if you choose that going forward, you're going to have inspections for site plan review.
I think it's critical that we
Yeah, I
do.
say, I don't see how we could not.
Well, I've had people say to me, you know, why are you doing this? This is a private piece of property.
Why are we reviewing it at all?
Right.
We
Well,
put
that's a
conditions
fair
on things,
question,
we
but
should- we
My
should
only, my
following
answer has
up
been,
and
well,
checking.
that's the way the planning board set it up, and that's why I'm here.
It might be a private piece of property, and they may have plans for it, but that still doesn't exclude them from being reviewed to make sure that the best health, safety, and welfare of the surrounding residents in the town as a whole are looked after.
Yeah, well, there are other ways of doing it, but that's the way that you've chosen to do it. So, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right, well, crap.
So that, yeah, well, crap.
Can we refuse your resignation?
Excuse me?
Yeah, we could do that, couldn't we?
What's that?
Refuse your resignation?
Oh, I'll just quit.
Well, I enjoy working with you. You're a wealth of knowledge, and quite frankly, I'm not quite sure how we're gonna be able to duplicate you.
Ah, you will.
No, I don't know. They're, you know, it's one thing to have the technical talents of the position, but to have the knowledge of the town,
It's the history.
that's,
history.
I mean, that's
Well,
invaluable.
I've been around this game since I was 14 in one fashion or another, you know. When my dad was in business, I worked with him during the summers. He was the town engineer for 40 years.
Yeah.
I followed him for 10 years as actually the town engineer.
Yep.
And then there was an issue, became a conflict of interest in whether or not I was a special employee or not, so I had to get off being a town engineer. And there's never been a town engineer since about 2000, I think. Like that. It's been over 20 years.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
But you've been handling it this way for a length of time.
Well, I think this way works, but it works with you.
Exactly.
Well, the one thing that was done prior to my time as starting as the consulting engineer that you have supported was that it was bounced between 2 and 3 different people. That I found was personally not a good thing because it meant you weren't getting consistency in some of the reporting and the way that things were looked at.
Yeah.
So when you
Something to
look
look
at
at.
whoever might be the one to do that, that's an important factor. Not only for you, but also for the people that are coming before you. They need to know some consistency as well.
Right, yeah,
So,
for sure.
you know, it's good in terms of the plan review as well as the inspection procedures that, you know, when somebody comes into town and they know that there's X, Y, Z to follow, that it's not only gonna be them, but everybody else is gonna go through the same thing.
Right, yeah, the
So-
devil you know.
Try to be consistent, yeah.
Okay, well, I guess we've got our work cut out for us over the next
Well, I'll be around for a little while.
December 31st of 2023, right? You didn't give me a year, you just said December 31st.
Did I say it that way?
Yes, you did, as a matter of fact.
I'll have to review the tape.
So that gives us about a year and a half to work on a replacement.
So before we close, we need to schedule the next workshop and what articles we're gonna look at next. As I think we're deferred discussion of Article 15 until the special subcommittee meets, but
Correct.
we have Article 14 that needs review, stormwater that needs review, subdivision.
Well, didn't Ken just kind of put it on the table that MS4 is something that should
Well,
be
I'm
put
just
off?
saying, I was listing all the open items. I mean,
Well, I mean-
subdivision is pretty much done. What do we need to do for MS4, Ken? You've got to present that, I guess, right?
Yeah, I do, and the way I see it now is that we modify Article 12 to address the stormwater management requirements of the EPA, MS4 in there. I think that's the most efficient way to do it.
Okay,
But
so if,
we'll go over that.
if we were going to schedule the next meeting, you know, based on immediate need for the town meeting, which article would you like to see brought forth for discussion?
I think the MS4 bylaw, Article 12 would be the one to bring forward first.
Okay, so we just need a date.
So,
Mondays are starting to get busy.
if we're thinking, so we meet the second and fourth Monday, so we could do August 1st. Wait, does this need to be out? No, it doesn't. Not until we vote.
This is a workshop. It has to
It's a
be, it
workshop.
has to be available for the public to view, but
Right.
It's
but
not a
no
public hearing.
comment. Yep.
So do we want to keep it consistent with a Monday, 6 PM then? Or not necessarily?
I think for consistency, I'd like to see a Monday.
Okay. So we could do, if it's on an off night, we could do Monday, August 1st. We could do Monday, August 15th,
Or the 29th.
or the 29th, yes.
Well, the 29th, that's kind of I don't know.
now we're getting close to time where we have to be ready for
Yeah,
fall
so-
town meeting.
Well,
So the
I don't,
first.
yeah, I was gonna say, I think we
Plus, that's
should,
Labor Day week, getting close.
right, it's getting
to
close to Labor Day weekend, right?
Yeah.
So why don't we shoot for the first? I mean, why miss any available days? Let's keep the momentum rolling.
Ken, would you be ready for us on the 1st?
Yes, I would be.
I'm okay with
I'll have the
first.
material out to you before that as well.
I guess I would be ready for the 1st.
Okay, so August 1st, workshop meeting for Article 14. And at that point, we should be ready, we should have had the discussion with zoning board on Article 6. We'd be able to actually put that to bed.
We hope so. I mean, next week we have the hearing.
Yep.
So, and then the following is when we're talking about the workshop, so.
I will
In
be
theory,
at
yes.
Next week's meeting remotely.
Okay.
You're going to be there remote, though, right?
Oh.
What's that?
Are you doing it remotely, right?
Next week, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so August 1st then, 6 o'clock here. Article 14, possibly Article 6. Okay,
That's Article 12, not 14.
I mean Article 12, I apologize. Would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
We have a second. Kyle wants-
Second.
Kyle doesn't want to leave. We have a motion by Sam Corbett, seconded by Kyle Schultz. All in favor of adjournment. Sherry?
Aye.
Mike? Mike wants to stay too. Jane?
Aye.
Kyle? Sam? And chair votes aye. Thank you all.
510.
Yep.